Hi pilots, welcome back to another Jetworks build video. This one will be doing the BAe Hawk, building it on, this will be my third model, absolutely fantastic flyer. So I'll be using Yoo-Hoo Por M7 3M77 spray, 5-minute and 13-minute epoxy. So the first step, once everything's cut out, is glue on bulkhead 1 and sort out the wing panel. So as we would normally do, use some low tack masking tape and tape off the slot that you've pre-cut out for the carbon spar, or as I've noticed recently, some of you epic builders have been using wooden spars. So here we have also marked out the aileron hinges, and I'm using the Jetworks 3D printed hinges here. Last couple of builds I've used some TPU, but here we're going to be using the Jetworks ones. Now I had some issues digging out the foam, however found that if you get a wee screwdriver, slot it in and then slowly run it along, it pulls the foam out of your hopefully low tack masking tape. And then mix up some 30-minute epoxy here. I've also added micro balloons. Now I only mixed up about 8 grams of it, however that wasn't enough. I did go back and mix up a little more later on once I realised that it just wasn't enough. So put your glue into the slot and again tease it out to the edges. It's the Depron that you want your carbon spar or wooden spar actually hooking up to and sticking to, not just glue on the bottom surface there. So spread it out, make sure, like I say, make sure it's nice and even. So here we have the hinges. Just make sure if you're using these hinges you get 2 of the pins and have the locating pins pointing in the opposite direction, that way it locks it into place. So I've just put a small amount of glue around the edges of the contact surface for the aileron hinges, not near the actual hinge itself, the movable part. Insert a carbon spar. I've got a wee weight on top of it just to secure it down, make sure it was nice and flat. And here's just a wee bit extra epoxy that I'm putting on the top, just to make sure there's a good coating of it in there. Scrape away the excess foam. Now this is going to be the underside, so I wasn't worried too much about any mess. So next step is the fuselage belly, the bottom, and securing bulkhead 1 onto it. Now in the EDF version here, what I've also done on the plans, as you can see there, that marking there is where it should actually be. However, my EDF unit was a bit smaller than the marked plan, so I moved it forward 6mm, just the rear slot, so that it would hold the EDF unit in. And I should have moved it forward a wee bit more. I did the same with the top panel as well. There was 2 parts that I've got the EDF bulkheads locations in it, so just make sure that you mark both. So for the EDF version, I've also printed a small cheater hole, and that was based from the EDF mouth intake. As you can see there, the 3D printed intake. It's all done in lightweight PLA other than the wee cheater mount itself. Measured it up in Fusion 360 against that intake itself, got the dimensions, and yeah, printed it. It was pretty easy. So a small amount of Yoo-Hoo Por on bulkhead 1, contact adhesive, let it dry ever so slightly, and I do speed up the process by blowing on it just to get the build done. So very simple. While the wing spar is all gluing, moving on to bulkhead 1, getting that together. Now on the plans, at the front and the rear, you have to, in the build guide, it's asking for corner reinforcers, which unfortunately are not in the plans itself, but very simple enough to put into place. So here we also need a 12mm, and at the back same 12mm strip. So what I've done is measured the 12mm from the 6 using a pen and my finger and just holding it at that level, that marking, and then just slowly running it along, and it works pretty well for me. So now that the epoxies had a chance to set and go off, just carefully remove the tape, and as you can see there, one of them either forgot to put glue in or just didn't put enough in. Check control surfaces, make sure nothing's binding with the glue, and it looked like it was working fantastic. So here we've got a nice finish on the wing plate. On the underside, we've got one still to put in that's obviously fell out. However, I'm taping up the inside ones because we didn't do them for the reason is the control rods, the control horn on the aileron hinges will be coming up. If I'd have done them initially, they would have been sticking up and I couldn't have had it flat to the build surface. So here I'm just putting a wee bit Yoo-hoo pour in the one that we forgot. And the same with the other hinges. And what I was doing there, I was just lining it up against the pre-cut servo mount just to see where it's going to go. And I've got the outer side of the control horn pointing outward so that it's further away from the fuselage. Not much at all, 3 or 4mm, but it certainly helps. So the next step is to sand and secure the ailerons, the shaping, feathering them off. You can use a wee sanding block and feather them back, but here I'm using a wee bit of balsa strip. So I've got a wee bit of balsa strip on the leading edge, just marking up the length that I need. This is a wee 6mm strip, and it's obviously the same for the opposite side. Cut away just what we need. And I've also got some small trailing edge that I thought, yeah, why not? Put it on there, it will certainly save me sanding away. It will add extra weight, obviously. However, it also gives it a bit more strength as well. There's a wee bit less flexibility. It will stiffen it up slightly. And I think it also gives it a nice wee finish. Like I say, I've got it sitting there. Obviously, for a lighter build, just go with the Depron and just sand it back using a block or just sanding paper. So here I've just lined it up and just carefully just cutting along the edge, trying to get it as horizontal as possible. And do the same with the opposite side. I was just sizing up those scrap pieces of foam to see if it would work on the fuselage belly as well. And then the same with the leading edge. I have in previous builds just stuck it on the outside, but figured maybe we should just keep the designed size of the wing and actually cut out a piece of foam so that it matches. And then using Yoo-hoo pour, just glue it on, a wee bit of tape just to secure it in place and hold it, making sure that I'm pushing it against the foam. But this is, like I say, it's just to help keep it in place while I carry on with the build. Just cutting wee strips of tape out of a normal piece. There we go. So the next step, securing the wing to the fuselage belly and dry fitting the fuselage sides. So I've got a wee bit of a liberal amount of Yoo-hoo pour. I figured, it's not really going to make much difference here. I'm not looking at sanding much and worrying about it being gloopy. So I've got a good amount of Yoo-hoo pour on there. Spray M77 would have worked fantastic in this point. and I'm just spreading it out to the edges, make sure there's a nice even thin layer of glue, and using the servo mounts and the back, just making sure that it's nice and square to the pre-cut holes, and at that 90 degrees you should be looking at marking it up the centre line. So here on the forward fuselage sides, we're looking at putting a crease fold in here. So what I'm doing is just marking up. You can see I've got some tape on the other side. The reason I'm putting the tape on there is to transfer the stress of bending the foam. That way it doesn't deform. And if you were to shape it like I just did there and stretch it and bend it, Depron would most likely snap. However, I'm just putting a wee marker on the line, just holding it against the table, not putting much force in it, and slowly teasing and bending up the foam itself. Like I say, the tape there helps remove the stress from that side and push it back to the side that you're actually bending. Works fantastic. So we're just sizing it up here and trying to get the nice curve and making sure we get a nice sort of airflow moving towards the back of the fuselage. So just using the corner of the table, pulling it across and trying to get a nice bend before we go securing them to the belly. Look pretty good. So get the U-hoo. Yes, servo wires, we'll get to that. Get the U-hoo, just get it on the contact surfaces and ready to put it in place. So while I was excited and just cracking on with the build, servo wires, yep, I figured that, well, I just realised that when we put these sides on here, how are you going to get your servo wires through without cutting into it? So on the end there, just at the tab, where there's a locator tab at the rear of the fuselage, just moving into the mouth of the ADF, I've just got a wee bit of tape, taping it together and holding it in place so it doesn't pop off, putting it in the location tabs and then offering it up to the fuselage, making sure it's lined up well with bulkhead number 1, and just a wee bit of tape just holding it in place. And it all looked fantastic. At that point I thought, yes, we're moving along. You could actually taper the rear locating pin there, just so there's that wee bit of smoother airflow going in. So here we are, next step, bulkhead number 2. Now what I've done here, as you can see, I'm marking out the size of the battery. Like I say, this is my third Hawk build. And I love the 27-100. It flies fantastic. However, you need to move it back a bit further. Obviously, with the bulkhead number 2 there, you'll struggle. So, you know, a 22,000 or something like that would be fantastic, or less. But I like the 27 and get a good flight time out of it. So I've just marked up bit of sizing for the battery just to make sure it goes through. Inserted bulkhead number 1, and then we're putting in some corner reinforcers up the front. Now these are just wee scrap pieces of foam, 6mm by 6mm. There's plenty of 6mm strips that we cut out. I think this was the strip from the wing reinforcer for the carbon spar. Wee bit of glue and offer it into position, and then we're doing the canopy support. So I will be doing the clear canopy, which it comes in 2 separate pieces for the clear canopy. Wee bit at the front there, offer it up to the bulkhead, and make sure that that part's lined up to bulkhead number 1 as well. Then at the rear, obviously there's the angled part, small amount of glue on one side, offer them up and smudge it about so there's a thin application, and then slide it into the fuselage, well, the cockpit, sorry. So next step's the bridge panels and the magnet panel. Very simple, small amount of glue. Like this is a relatively quick build as well, not a lot to it. Just removing away some excess glue there. There's the bridge panel at the front, I just small amount of trimming just to make sure it fits nice and neat and I'm not forcing it in. Fits superb. Moving away just any excess glue. And bridge panel, the last two there. The big one goes on, there's a smaller one as well that I've just offered up. Got some excess glue. And just put them both together and leave them to set. So moving on to the EDF unit and the rear fuselage corner reinforcers. As you can see, I've got the scrap pieces that I've trimmed away and marking out 12mm using the pen and my finger to hold it in place. Just cutting off a 12mm strip. And it fits great. Obviously we're leaving 6mm spacing of foam on the belly itself, so that the side panels can butt up next to it. So a thin bead of glue on one strip, offer them up and smudge it about so it's nice and thin, and a wee bit of glue just at the front there of the wing plate. Slide it into place, let that set, and then moving on to the EDF unit. So 64mm, yes, as you can see there, I've got the EDF bulkheads trimmed away. The trimmings are on the table now. It is quite a tight fit, however it works. This is my second EDF build. It was originally designed for a 50mm, however get a nice shoehorn and a sharp blade and we can squeeze that 64mm into it. So I've got the front bulkhead here, and I've just secured it with a piece of hot glue and just test fitting. And as you can see there, yeah, I could possibly have moved that rear bulkhead maybe another 2 or 3mm to the front. But it still fits. Still fits, not too bad. And then just using the top template as well, just to make sure that's lined in place. And a wee bit of glue just to secure it in before we move on to the rest of it. So the next step should be the fuselage sides and the intake. So I've got the intake here, and I'm just sizing it up, marking it up before I secure the EDF unit and the intake itself. Now I will say I've done very well to follow the build guide here. Believe it or not, there is maybe 1 or 2 steps out of place, but I've done really well to hold to Craig's fantastic build guides. See here where I'm just cutting out, marked in, using the EDF intake, just marked in where the hole is for the wee cheater that I've designed. I'll certainly send it on to Craig or anybody that's looking for it. And then just test fitting things up. Once I was happy that it was a nice tight fit, a wee bit of contact adhesive at the EDF mounts. Now make sure that you twist your EDF mount for the wires to be accessible when it comes to sorting out your thrust tubes and stuff. I did trim a wee bit in between the EDF bulkheads. I just trimmed a wee triangle out because of the edges of the EDF unit itself. It was forcing into the foam and I thought it wasn't sitting quite as flush. So a small amount on the front of the EDF unit itself, and then offer up the intakes. So on the side panels, like we've done already, what we're going to do is we're going to form them against the, servos, don't mention the servos. I'm going to form them against the edge of the table to get a nice curve. So here I've used some contact adhesive for the wee cheater hole, and I've just put a wee bit of tape on it so any excess glue doesn't fall onto the build plate. So here we are with the fuselage side panels. Like I say, we're forming them, curving them, pulling them across the table. And at this point I'm thinking, servos. I can see on the wing plate itself, there's the mounts there for the servos. But if I put these sides on, it's going to be very difficult to access the servos and put the wires through, get them into the battery bay or the receiver position, wherever it is you choose to put it. But not thinking of that or noticing it at the time, I'm just happily, cracking on with the build, moving along with the contact surfaces, getting some glue on it, ready to accept the curved side panels. So there's one to the side, and it was at this point I thought, damn, I need to get the servos in place. So I thought, well, I've started with the glue on one side, let's just finish off the glue, get it into place, and then get my servos. I thought, it shouldn't take too much time, it is a contact adhesive, it should be fine if I'm quick enough to get the servos in place. Obviously I've already centered them, I've got my control horn and stuff on it. But the servo housing, where it's going to go, needs a wee bit of trimming just to suit the size of the servos that I've got. So once it was trimmed, cut a wee relief around the servo horn itself, got a sharp blade and poke through the fuselage sides, just to get the servo wires through. And again, let's say you're trying to do this as quick as possible, because I've already got glue in it. Checking the servo control push rod fits fine, and then a wee bit of glue and push that servo into place, trimming away the excess control horn, and do the same with the opposite side as well, as quick as you can. Get that servo in. Once that's in and your wires are through, we've still got the glue on the side, so as you can see I was kind of, right, get that into place. Now the front and the back, it is oversized. The plans does say to cut it extended, just so that when you trim it back you get that nice flush finish and you get the, a nice finish that you're looking for. So after all those dramas, the next step is the thrust tube. Whether you're 3D printing them or making them out of clear plastic, small amount of glue, offer it in place. You can see I've cut a wee hole there just to get the motor wires through. Slide it into place, and look, just check through the exhaust itself, the rear, just to make sure it's lined up as best as you can with the EDF, so that you get a nice clean airflow out the back. And then it's the exhaust bulkhead itself. I've put a wee bit of contact glue around the thrust tube itself and on the contact surfaces of the Depron at the rear at the side panels, and a wee bit of tape just to secure it and keep it in place while I move on with the rest of the build. And it fits fantastic. I did trim it ever so slightly. So here on the EDF or pusher, it's time to add some corner reinforcers at the top. And like I say, these are not in the printed plan. However, it's very simple and easy enough to do. We're using some scrap pieces of foam. Small, just measure it up between both bulkheads. Cut 2 equal strips. Small amount of glue, offer them up. As you can see here, just checking it's the same on both sides. Cut one piece. Small amount of glue again, put it up. Now here I just use a wee bit of imagination and cut a wee dagger shape. As you can see, it's not very symmetrical, however it works. Just sliding it up gently. I'm not forcing it into the EDF intake itself, the 3D printed, just to get a wee bit extra support around the sides. And then here, just measuring up. Like I say, I've actually cut a bit more than it was needed, due to the side panels being longer than is actually required. So there was a wee bit of messing about here. I thought I'll cut 6mm and we'll get that nice 6x6 strip in there, and then I thought, no, I need to cut it back at a 45-degree angle just to keep a nice smooth airflow, because once that's in there it'd be difficult to sand. So I was messing about, cutting a couple of 6x6 strips and then cutting them in half, and it worked out. It worked well after a wee bit of messing about. So just line these up with the top of the fuselage sides itself. Simple enough. Next step is the rear elevator servo support and the mount mechanism itself. So a small amount of glue, offer it up and smudge it about so there's a nice even contact both surfaces. Give it a wee chance to air dry and then stick it on. Now here I've marked the slot at the back, and I'm using, like I normally do, is a 8mm carbon slot. And what I've done is I'm taping it off, ready to accept the servos. The control mechanism, the rod, the aluminium tube that the plan asks for, or the 8mm carbon slot that I'm putting into place. So here we're getting to building it, getting the motor cables and that through. I've put the elevator servo in, glued that into position. In fact, I didn't. I just forced it into position. Now, I drew a wee line with a pen between the push rod itself and the rear where the control rod's going to go. Sliding a 6mm carbon spar into the 8mm tube, and I've already angled the rods itself, ready to accept the elevator, and I 3D printed a control horn as well. So what I've done, I've shaped it up, marked it up, just to measure it and make sure it's fine. Trim a wee bit of tape there, and I'm just marking on the side of the fuselage where the elevator spar is going to go, making sure that the position that I have the control horn in is not going to rub against the thrust tube or the side parts itself. So what I've done is I've left the other side of the 8mm slot, a wee bit contact adhesive, and sliding on the control horn, and then removing one side just to make sure that I don't get any glue caught in it. Putting the two pieces back together. The 8mm tube that I had in there, I had it the full length, but I cut it so that there was 4 or 5mm spacing to allow and accept the control horn. So mixing up a small amount of epoxy here. It's just 5-minute epoxy. Added a wee bit of micro balloons just to thicken it up so it doesn't ooze out underneath the where I intend to glue it. And here I'm not putting as much in. All I want is it connecting to the sides of the Depron. We certainly don't want too much in there and squeezing it and then moving along and getting to that control rod, and then it's all stuck solid. So a wee bit additional glue on the top there just to secure it and allow it to set. Once it was done, just checked it was free and moving, and it was fine. So here we're just measuring up a push rod. Got a linkage stopper on the servo. We'll get the push rod through the elevator housing, and I've got them both on the furthest away position on the servo and the control horn that I've printed. Hook it up to the radio and just test it. Yeah, mechanism working fine. I did actually have to reverse it there on the radio. And then we're just securing with the linkage stopper it's in and it's ready to go. As you can see there, it's not as clean a finish as I usually have, whether it be on the wing or something, but as it's on the back, I can put a small amount of filler in, and we're just test fitting it, lining it up to the fuselage to see how it is, and it all looks pretty well. Just making sure that the linkage. Again, I'm having to cut a small slot there for the securing pins on the EDF mount itself. It was pushing against the, obviously with the way that I've turned the EDF unit to allow the wires to be pointing out the top. So you're just trimming up the top part, the fuselage cover, the top, just where I'm going to recess the ESC into, to make sure between the intake and the ESC we get a nice clean as possible airflow to allow it to obviously cool down. So yeah, it's all looking a pretty decent fit. Mark up, just look at where the ESC is going to go, and it all seems quite happy with that. So the next step is securing it down and getting the nose panel, the nose cone on. So here, just make sure I had checked the orientation of the motor and the ESC so that I knew which wire was going into what location. Just so that we were blowing air out the back, not sucking it in like a hoover. Again, test fitting, make sure I'm happy with it, and then at this point I realised that yes, I hadn't glued in the rear servo. So along the contact surfaces on the fuselage, just offering up some glue, and again in the centre, and I put some glue on top of the 3D printed intake as well. Wee bit of glue on the servo mount, slid that into place, and a wee bit there on the locating pin at the rear, just to make sure that I've not missed anything. Quite happy with that. Feed through the ESC wires and the elevator, and then time to hot glue in the ESC. What I did there was I just put a wee small slither of hot glue on the 3D printed intake and held it against the fuselage top just to make sure that that was stuck before we glued in the ESC itself. Wee bit of hot glue around the edges and then hold it nice and tight till it goes off. So again, I've got lightweight printed nose cone here. This is 0% infill, it's only 2 walls. I think it weighs about 7 grams possibly. And then the nose cone aligner, small amount of glue, offer it up to the fuselage, and then push on the nose cone, allow that to go off as well. Next step's the turtle deck offering up the bulkhead, small amount of glue against the rear of the canopy. The rear bulkhead there, it just goes on in front of the servo. If you look at the plans, it shows just in front of that rear locating pin in front of the ESC. So I've marked along the top of the fuselage just a couple of markings where the side panels are going to go. And here on the turtle deck sides, again, I've just cut some 6mm strips, measured it from the front bulkhead to the rear of the servo tray, and just cut a couple of strips, and then getting the turtle deck sides, bit of glue on the contact surfaces, and then offer it up. glue that into place. As you can see on the elevator, I've put a wee bit of spare leading edge, balsa trailing edge that I had. So now that the inner turtle deck corners are in, we've got the turtle deck sides in as well. There is an additional slot, reinforcer that we need to put inside. Again, just measured up a couple of strips from both bulkheads. Small amount of glue and then offer that up. And these are just there to help support the turtle deck when we get to shaping and sanding. So as you can see, the glue was still a bit wet there, as I just rushed to get through the build and get it done. Just adjusting the wires. So next steps, turtle deck top and the canopy. As we know, I'll be using a clear canopy and just measuring up the turtle deck top just to make sure I'm happy with it. All fits pretty well. Now here I've just put in an extra wee slither at the top there, a wee bit of support, because I know that when it comes to sanding it, the 6mm turtle deck top, it will be quite thin there, so I've just put in a wee extra bit just for a wee bit more support. So on the contact surfaces, offer up some glue, slide about the turtle deck top. I have tapered it off and sanded it at the back, so it goes to a nice point, nice and flush at the tail. A wee bit of tape just securing it in place. Holding it down while I move on to the next step. Very quick build. It's a fantastic wee monster. It's great fun. So next step is the sanding part. So I've got the intakes again that I've 3D printed. What I've actually done is I extended them 6mm in height. The width wise from the fuselage to the sides of the intakes fit fantastic. However, I thought, let's get that extra 6mm to flatten it out, get it right to the edge of both the top and the bottom, so it's nice and smooth. You could sand it away back and get that nice wee curve, but I thought just extend it a wee bit, push them on and get it secured. So while we went to the sanding, we went out the back and get a wee bit of sanding, I made using the elevator supports. Got two of them, cut a couple extra. There's a wee bit of glue there. And I had it so that both of them, I didn't just have the one piece of foam holding it, I'd have the two just to hold it as level as possible. So we've taped off the underside of the elevators, mixed up a small amount of epoxy. We don't need a lot in here at all. Just at the bottom, and be sure to keep some away from the edge where your elevator tube will be, as your control spar will be running through the tube. So let's say I've got the two pieces there just to hold them nice and level. Marking up and pushing them into the fuselage as close as I think it should be. Later on I do actually need to trim it back at the leading edge there, because when we push down, when the tips move down the fuselage, it starts to rub a bit. So I was measuring it off there and it was about 7.5 centimeters, just slightly less at the leading edge. So last step is the vertical stabilizer, just a small amount of epoxy, using 30-minute epoxy here just on the contact surfaces. Now on the vertical stabilizer, I've just sanded the leading edge and tapered off the trailing edge with sandpaper. I didn't bother about the balsa. That's it. offer that in and just let it set, and that's your model built. I hope this has helped, pilots. Like I say, you know, we've shoehorned a 64mm in here, and it was originally designed for a 50. However, there has been some fantastic models built, as you can see here, both EDF and pusher versions. So if you have started one, I hope this has helped you and maybe gives you that push to carry on. But it can be done with the 64mm, and it flies absolutely superb. So like I say, hope this has helped. Thanks for staying this long, pilots, and we're looking forward to seeing your builds. Thank you.